Good Thinking, episode 55.
Hello. How are you feeling?
I am feeling so much better today than I was yesterday.
Well, that cellulite haze. It's the real deal.
Yeah, amazing as always. The weather was beautiful. That place is just like, can't recommend it enough. I don't understand how it hasn't turned into Cabo, and hopefully it won't. It's just, as you know, such a great vibe, such a great place to be. And they had a carnival, so we experienced that over the weekend.
Amazing. All right. Well, Good Thinking, the podcast about trends and all the things I normally share on Slack, but now share every week with you guys. So
Indeed. And how are you feeling? How's the back?
I'm like a new person. I mean, I don't know what this fascia flossing situation is really about, but I can tell you that it is a game changer. I had this amazing one-on-one session with Bon, who's the founder of Fascia Floss, or the Floss, I think she calls it, and I was unable to walk before I went into that. Like I told her, I was like, I don't think it's a good idea coming here, and like you don't want me here. And she was like, no, come, I can help. And she was right. I mean, 45 minutes later, I went from like hobbling to get to the class to walking around and, parenting a nearly 5-year-old as if I was, in full force. And a week later, I'm like new. I went to the gym today.
So, wow. That's impressive.
Can't recommend it enough. I mean, I also did some cranial sacral, and obviously that's like amazing too. So, I found my person here in the hills of Italy, and she is like a magic hands kind of person. So, yeah.
Sounds like that's worth the trip alone.
It's a combo I highly recommend. So
amazing. And the other shout out I do want to do is the Marketing Playbook podcast, which still thinking about, people are still talking about, definitely like listen to it over and over again, has some really great insights. I think that we talk throughout about, and certainly hits on a lot of your soapboxes, which are, the future of things.
Yeah. I mean, in the podcast, we used the framework of the 2025 trend predictions, which will be also kind of the topic of conversation at Brands and Culture in April. If you're there in New York City and want to come, April 2nd. So while what we talked about with Mark was just a few of those things, we're going to be talking about all of those, the whole set of them at Brands and Culture. So yeah, it's really fun. Really great feedback on that podcast. So thanks for listening, guys.
All right, let's dig in.
Let's do it.
So there's a lot of different things, and maybe it's just how excited and my energy and coming back, but I'm really excited to dig into many, many things. And there's a few within the buckets. We're going to go through the regular buckets as we do, but then I also have a couple in each at moments. So we'll try to be mindful of time. Under culture, I think it's everywhere. The Duolingo thing, I think we got to break it down a little bit, and talk about it, but it's literally in all of my feeds. And so it's obviously been something we've talked about for a while. And I think this is the next iteration, and it's kind of genius. Do you want to give a little breakdown?
Yeah. I mean, so Duo, the mascot, they announced that Duo is no more. And I said this in the newsletter, like, I do not see this as a one and done like announcement. Like, I don't think that they're like, oh, our mascot is like, we're not going to invest in our mascot anymore. I'm not sure where they're going with it. But I really don't think they're permanently killing it off. So I'm hoping that it's a part of a larger rollout. The feedback on the campaign is like, oh, wow, we're logging in.
Wow. I mean, I'm trying to share a screen, and one of them's really loud, and then one of them's X, and I don't really feel great about that. So far, like the technical quality, not great.
Yeah, don't worry about it. I think everyone's seen it. What I was going to say was that for me, what's interesting is the very polarized reception to it. So a lot of lovers, and a lot of haters, which I always think is a good sign for a campaign, quite honestly. Like, if you're doing anything and you're not upsetting anybody, then you're probably not doing anything that interesting. So I think, from my personal perspective, yes, this is Zoe Sackman, like, really, I really like Zoe, and I'm not entirely sure I agree with her, but she was not happy with this campaign. She was basically like, how can this be where we are, and everybody, jumping on this bandwagon, and it's just brands upon brands commenting on brand things, and like, this is, like she said, like, we're circling the drain here. Quite negative. I saw a lot of people very unhappy with the death thing. There was a lot of I found some of the content a little bit jihadist vibes. And then, there was a lot of people who obviously, and I'm quite sensitive to this too, like the suicide angle of this was quite upsetting to people. So all of those things I completely get. To me, what was most interesting, honestly, was I'm less interested in brands commenting on other brands' campaigns, though I do think it was that's kind of what everybody wants these days. So great for them.
I'm here for that for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I get it. That's a sign, I think, today, that is a sign that your campaign is going well, right? That you have created enough social resonance that other brands want to be part of your culture.
Totally.
The culture that you've created. So I think that's a great sign. I think it's less interesting than how they've rolled this out. And to me, they rolled it out, and it was a big, they did a little announcement, and it was only written, and then there's kind of been teasing the whole time, and everyone's there's a lot of mystery, and then suddenly celebrities are coming in. Are these celebrities being paid? Are they not being paid to be commenting on this? Who knows? And I think it just speaks volumes to the fact that campaigns today, social first campaigns, need kind of this drip, big moment at some point, but need this kind of lore. I think it was interesting also. There was somebody that I read was I think Nathan, who I posted, I linked to his post, and he was kind of saying something that I thought was interesting, but I didn't entirely agree with it. He was saying that he felt like it was really good because it goes to show that you could spend, and I think this is true, millions and millions and millions on a Super Bowl ad to be completely erased in 2 seconds by somebody's social campaign. And that's true. And I do think that talks about kind of where we are. These guys have developed enough in culture that they have the ability to drop something into culture, and everybody's listening because they have created this big space in culture where they are so important, right? Everybody has been looking at them, and everyone has been talking about them for so long that when they do something, it matters, and they can erase everything that you've just spent a whole year and all of your marketing budget on this one thing at the Super Bowl, and that thing, no one's talking about it anymore, and this thing costs probably nothing to do, and it erased everything. That's true. What I didn't completely agree with is that he made the comment that emotional campaigns no longer work, and culturally relevant campaigns are the only things that work. And to me, it's not yes and not that, right? To me, I think that Duo has created a space in culture by getting us to be in love with a bird. And there is an emotional resonance portion of it. It's not the sappy love story, but people feel emotional and have this weird relationship with a bird, with a weird man in a mascot or woman in a mascot thing. So I don't think that there's no emotion for people. It's funny and it's cultural, but I don't think that it's devoid of emotion. It's not just about culture. You can't get somebody to fall in. They've done all the work to have us fall in love with them, and then they have this place in culture because of it. And love can look a lot of different ways. That's just my
Yes. I mean, absolutely true. I think that's a great point, and I think that's really like the basis of all of it. I think that Duolingo has created cultural currency,
Right.
and that is more relevant than advertising or marketing.
Yes, that is entirely true. But I don't think they got there just by, they got there by being risky. They got there by being culturally relevant. But they also got there by us wanting to continue to see it because we're emotionally entertained by this bird.
100%. 100%.
So, yeah.
Yes, and
I don't think it's exactly. And I think that to kind of, black and white it is a little bit simplistic, but I completely agree with most of what he says. He's very smart.
Yeah. That's a good segue into Severance, and we don't need to dig into it a lot, but I just think like what they're doing is creating cultural currency. They are, instead of advertising in a typical way that many, many brands are still continuing to do, and that's like the fall of the advertising agency and all of these parts and pieces, like really digging into culture as we do, is for the long term, you're going to be there for it versus kind of an advertising or one-off spot, but as well as really like long-term from a brand positioning standpoint. I think that's really what Apple's doing with Severance, the self-help book, the Cube and Times, whatever, Grand Central.
I couldn't agree more. And I have, you wanted this to be quick.
Come on.
But it's not going to be quick.
Come on. Okay. I'm here for it.
Here's the thing. I need to first kind of distinguish what is working for me about it. And it's the difference between, so what Severance is doing is world building. And when we had all this Barbie stuff going on, all of those collabs were beginning to get to world building, right? And I think now things have become so simplified that people think, oh, a collab equals building on this world. And it is not world building to put I'm so upset with the White Lotus. Like, I haven't talked about it too much because I just don't think they're not doing anything relevant enough to be worthy of talking about it. But like, they're putting, like making Hawaiian shirts and, doing a collab with Away, and usually Away I'm quite into, but it's not world building to make useless collabs. And I think that people confuse that because I think they think of collabs as being they're a way to get into culture, and they can be when they're done right. But when they're gratuitous and just kind of unnecessary and they don't really add to anything, then it is not building culture to have a collab. And I think that is the strong difference for me about what Severance is doing, is instead of saying, hey, we're going to make like a Patagonia jacket, which, yes, could have been very funny and talking about kind of the bigger picture of like why we have the show in the first place. Yes, exactly. But they didn't do that. They built on the lore of the show, right? And so they've created more places for you to enjoy the show. And in doing so, anybody who hasn't been watching Severance is like, I don't know what's happening here, but if all of this is happening, I better go watch this show, right? Because it's like, okay, this world seems interesting and it seems fun and something that I want to be part of. And, there's lots of people who do world building really well. Vacation Sunscreen is like a really great example that everybody uses. But what works about it is that people can kind of like, decide to be a part of it. You don't decide to be a part of something because you have a collab, and I think that people confused what Barbie did because they thought it was just like a bunch of collabs, but actually they were doing collabs in a kind of a different, like they were trying to build on, like Barbie was about all of these objects and all of these things that Barbie liked, right? So in doing collabs that made you feel like you were part of the movie, then it's smart. But like, it's really kind of nuanced, but it's really not nuanced. And yeah, I think it's worth kind of just thinking about as people get collab fatigue now, and like my collab fatigue is high.
Right.
Thinking more about brands too, not just shows, but I think everybody could kind of look at like, how do you Duolingo is also building this world, right? Like you're suddenly like you're following along to like the death notifications of a mascot. Like what on earth is happening? So
right. What are we doing with our lives? Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of brands will see something like a Barbie and go, oh, great, like, let's do that. And as we know, like the CMO or, let's do that. We got to follow what they're doing versus go like, look, wow, let's step back, big picture. What they're doing was really impressive. The impact that they made in culture, in marketing, in brand, and in dollars and sales, and all the things was really impressive. How do we do that for our brand? Because it's not cookie cutter to across the brand. It's like, okay, well, what's your strategy? How are you impacting culture? How is it right for your particular brand in, your particular way? It's not like one stop shop fits all. Are those two different?
completely, yeah. I mean, I think I hope that everyone who's listening to this like also understands that that's the nature of like all brand building. Like if you're not doing that, I think in the next section within culture, I might mention Substack, and that's the same thing. Like it's if you're going to build a brand, your brand a Substack, like you can't, not build it in the way that's right for your brand, and you have to build it in the way that's right for the platform, right? So everything in marketing should be that way, but it seems to be that sometimes like it's like you look at it and it's like, oh, this is how we do a rollout, and it's not like necessarily right for your brand.
Right. I think oftentimes people look for the golden ticket or like the shortcut to be able to like, they did this, therefore we can do that. And it's just not that simple. Okay.
Yeah.
So moving on, and maybe this is another good segue. Poppy. I feel like it's a brand that we love, and like, what the fuck happened?
Yeah. I mean, so first of all, I think, again, this might not be the mainstream take on things, but like that's why we come here. Is I just want to say that we all know that 25K times 30 is nothing for brands to be spending money on in marketing, right? Like anyone who's watching this podcast is deeply aware that's like, pocket change to some brands. And somebody made this big point of like, why are we upset about Poppy doing this when Dunkin' Donuts spent X amount on Ben Affleck's Super Bowl ad? And it's not wrong. I think what Rachel kind of talks about in her Substack post about it really well is that it's not that we don't know that brands spend money. It's sort of the overt waste of the money, and the of people can it's like when you pay an influencer, like they're not, I mean, some influencers do kind of share globally, like more, not like per campaign how much money they got, but they'll share sometimes like how much money they've made on a brand campaign, and or like for the year. But like most people aren't saying like, hey, I got paid 25K to like do this post for you, And so I think here it's like, you're getting this and then you're seeing it and you're like, what on earth? Like it just feels wasteful. And I think, she also compares it to Tarte. And Tarte had done this thing where they sent one influencer, and this is, again, it happens all the time. It's just that people don't see it often. But they sent like one influencer like a makeup and then like an Hermes bracelet, and the other person got some Tarte product and Cheetos, and they each posted about them. And actually the girl who had the Cheetos, like she was happy about it, and she would like had she not seen the Hermes bracelet, or had the world not seen the Hermes bracelet, like no one would have cared. She was happy to get something. But it's the disparity, the unfairness of it, the feeling that it's like, oh my god, like why is this person getting this ridiculous thing? And I think my advice just generally is like, whether it's overt like the Poppy or covert like the Tarte thing, that's like sort of wasn't maybe supposed to be shown that they got the Hermes bracelet or the Cheetos, they just wanted them to show the product. Think about the perception of what you're doing. And I also think generally, like the awareness that brands need to have that consumers are not going to be have the wool pulled over their eyes anymore. They're really smart and they know and they want to call bullshit on you all the time. So do things the way that if you did it, like, what would you think of it? I don't know if it was the worst. I mean, I think they just ended up getting the wrath of something. I'm not sure it's the worst thing that any brand has ever done.
Yeah.
But I do think that, people don't like to have things flaunted in their face.
Right. I think it's the wool over the eyes. I think it's how it feels from the consumer level, which I think can feel inauthentic or kind of something being flaunted. And then, as we were talking about Duolingo and however you want to interpret the death of it, that was something that we could connect with and was representative of their brand, but wasn't a huge, and I'm sure it costs money to do for sure, but it wasn't something that was just in your face and felt like they were doing it to make it cool or make it a thing. It felt something that was coming from maybe a more authentic place.
Right. Yeah.
All right. Moving on to drugs and booze. I mean, I think we have to talk about Barrow because we know this movement's been happening. We know it's a thing. And I think it's just fascinating, particularly their positioning.
Yeah, we've talked about them before. I think to me, their positioning of just generally light beer is getting, like, the whole post is about light beer getting repositioned overall, right? That it's kind of getting this like kind of I don't know, light beer was kind of this like, weak men, like weak drink, weak brand kind of feeling. And didn't really evolve. Like all the players in it, like, weren't really competing with one another, for clout, maybe for sales. But now this kind of new set is coming out. So they have Garage, which is the Kelsey brothers brand, which is very like, talk about like, if masculinity, like traditional masculinity, is back, this brand is like representative of that. There's another one here, I didn't really mention it because I didn't think the branding was that great. And then Real American, which is a vibe, that's Hulk Hogan's brand. And it's like very, very Republican and Americana vibes. Yes. It is a vibe, but Barrow is also a vibe, and I think it's very different to like most non-alcoholic beers. Like, I love the taste of athletic brewing, but the branding is not that great. And I think that this really kind of the can is really elevated. He really, like, this is a celebrity brand that actually makes sense. I've mentioned before, he's Tom Holland's very open about not drinking and what it's done for him. And, I think they're showing kind of where we want not the non-alcoholic space to go generally, which is, it's not a substitute or a less than product. It can be just the product.
Totally. I think that's it. I think that non-alcoholic beer is always tried to be not beer.
Right.
And I think this is an example of non-alcoholic beer trying to be beer. And I think it works.
Yeah.
Okay. Silvers. Lulu and Joan. Go.
Well, I had a post about this today, so it feels fresh. Yeah, I mean, claps to Lululemon. I have a few readers from Lululemon, so I don't know if they read my post about Joan, like maybe 8 months ago. Maybe it was even longer ago. I wrote about her in one of my very first Good Thinking newsletters. She's amazing. In her 70s, she started working out around 70. Like, it's not like she's been like this fitness athlete for her whole life. And she has this really beautiful story. And Lululemon is worked with her. And I like the beginning of this ad, the spot, most of all of it. The rest of it kind of falls apart and gets a little bit like kumbaya for me. But the beginning of it, where she's a badass and like, you're feeling like, oh my God, like, I can't believe there's another like fitness like person, is so funny.
So good.
So yeah, I like that. I actually think it would be stronger without like the live like you're alive, like I think it's too tied to like age. Like I don't think they need that. I don't think they need to like really like make it all about her, you know, longevity in life. But yeah, I really like the campaign. It's cool. I think the casting is great, and I think brands are waking up to the fact that my post today on LinkedIn is about, and you know the soapbox. So like this is an aspirational person across the age spectrum. This is somebody that a Gen Z, like somebody in Gen Z wants to aspire to be, and somebody who's a silver. It's not necessarily like, oh, you have to kind of make this brand for one or the other audience. These people are aspirational. And the Cezanne example that we've had before, and also like the Michelob example, like all of these silvers, like they are representative of something that we all want, which is, you know, to be thriving and to be happy and to be cool and to be interesting and sexy and awesome and smart and sporty and all of those things. Like they are aspirational. And I don't think we all have to go and have only silvers in our campaigns, but I think it's just for a long time, I think brands really thought, like, I get asked a lot, like, what do? We have this older consumer and then we want this younger consumer. How do we not alienate the consumer we have and get this younger consumer? And it's like, it's just the wrong question. It's how do you make the older consumer that you have more representative of where that older consumer is, which is what this ad is about. Like this is a reality. It's not an outlier case that women and men of a certain age are getting more into fitness, are living their living a third and fourth and fifth chapter of their lives. And this is aspirational. So if you have an older consumer, start representing where that consumer genuinely is versus viewing them as this like fuddy-duddy thing. Like they're not fuddy-duddies. Like you need to update. They don't need to update. You need to update your view on it.
Mm-hmm. Totally. And I think many brands are still stuck in the idea of like, if you're trying to create the audience, to your point, what you said early on, like they typically go, okay, well, this is our demographic, so we have to have somebody in this demographic in our images and things like that. And I think that's completely gone. And it's about, well, what is aspirational? And it's what's interesting, what's aspirational, where is culture, all of the parts and pieces. And it's a much bigger Venn diagram for all brands, and being so stuck in the demographic, which is out the door. I think, you know, I love the term that you use when we do workshops is like, what Instagram rabbit hole are they going down at 3 a.m.? And I think that's really it, is figuring out and finding that for all brands and, you know, really blowing that out versus like, oh, they're this age, they're this income, they're this gender, they're this sexuality, they're this blah, blah, blah. I think that's really gone out. And this is showing that for sure.
Yeah.
All right. On. A lot to talk about in retail, but I got to pick one. Elmo and On. I think it's an interesting campaign, and I think we're, you know, really interested to see kind of where they take On as a brand, because it's got a lot of opportunity.
Yeah. There's a lot in this newsletter that is kind of like a polarizing thing. So let me first say that my belief that there is a cultural movement towards wanting to be less cutthroat and less the only thing that matters is winning, and less like you against me and competitive above everything else. I do believe that that is something as a culture that we are trying to reconcile. I think actually maybe we were trying to reconcile it, and now we're moving more into our boom boom era, and like we are back to being cutthroat. So yes, and Adidas is also kind of going in this direction of kind of like, you know, you can do it for yourself and do it for the, you know, it doesn't need to be, I'll post about it in the show notes, but I'll also post about it probably on Sunday. They're also kind of going in this direction. Mm-hmm. I don't think that what they're trying to tap into is the wrong thing to tap into.
Right.
I do think that the insight is there. Here's my feeling on it, is that, and I like let me say this first. I do like that it is a contrast to Nike. Like Nike has gone full on aggressive, like cutthroat. We win. We nothing like
even if you can't win.
If you can't win, killers first. It's very aggressive lately. And so I think that it's nice to have that balance, right? You don't want to have everybody doing the same thing. But Adidas and On are kind of doing the same thing. So here's my feeling. It is hard in general to have a kind of everything is okay and like we can all hold hands together, kumbaya, stay interesting, because I think you have to figure out what it means to people to do that. And so I think it is interesting that they partnered with Elmo, because I think Elmo and Sesame Street is one of the few places in the world where we have managed to stay interested in the feelings that Elmo is able, and Sesame Street has always been really able to kind of like help us tap into like, what is it that you are feeling and why do you feel that way? But it is very difficult to keep that interesting when you're talking about shoes and talking about sports. And even Federer, who's in the campaign, he was not known for being anti-competitive. Like he is a little bit more like soft now as a kind of in his retirement era. But I liked his stance of being more like the gentleman's sports person. And it's like, you don't have to cut your neighbor's shoelaces and like slash their tires to win. Like he won because he was good. And I think that there's a difference. And so to me, what I worry about with On is it feels like it's kind of grasping at trying to figure out what soft means, but it hasn't grasped like what soft means to us. Like what are we trying to get at when we say that we don't like, that we want like this bigger thing, and it's not just like we all want to do this together. And Outdoor Voices tried to get into that of like we all kind of like we don't have to do like competitive sports, and it didn't really go well. So I think it's just going to be really interesting to watch them figure out. My view on it is that they don't really look like they know where they are in culture. Like they're kind of just doing this and we're like saying, and people need something to grasp onto. They need to know where you're going and what you stand for. And I'm not really sure that we've like figured out what On stands for right now. Like they totally. Like, they have cool campaigns, but they're not all making sense for me.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I think my biggest question around this is this brand positioning or is this just a campaign? Because it feels very, very different than like the Zendaya campaign and having her as a spokeswoman and kind of being a part of that. Like, where are they actually going? Like, what am I going to go to On for? And what is the vibe? What is the cultural relevance? Like, what is that? And I think Elmo, to me, we often, we talk about kind of the pendulum swing and within this pendulum swing, which I'm a huge fan of. But Elmo, like Sesame Street's on one very, very far end of that. Like they could have chosen to go a little bit different that maybe wasn't as far from where their campaign was before, where they are from a positioning standpoint. And I think if they only do this one, campaign, it's like, what are you guys doing? I think it does feel like, what do you stand for?
I agree with that. Like the Zendaya campaign to me, like was starting to say that On was about kind of adventuring in sports and being out in nature and enjoying itself. Like she was on this, like, and this exists in real life, and like I highly recommend going. There's this amazing slide in Switzerland. We used to live an hour from it. You can go down and it's just like, it's both terrifying and magical and stunning, and it's all the things. It's perfect set. And she's going down it, and and then she's also, it's clear that she's probably, and because everybody in Switzerland does this, like hikes to get there and like wears the shoes. And it felt like it was more like it doesn't always have to be like you're an extreme athlete, right? Like, and everyone, Nike is always like everybody is an athlete, but now they're kind of like athletes are athletes. So we can talk about them another day, but I do think, it just feels to me like they're like, oh, like we're doing all these things, but it's like, I just don't know what I'm trying to grasp. Like, what are we standing for? And so I hope that there is a bigger picture, because I think otherwise, like, they're doing a lot of things to try to be cool, but they're not going to stay cool because they're not building on something that we can all get behind.
Totally. Again, tying back to the larger cultural strategy, not just kind of the campaign of the moment. Mm-hmm. All right. Moving on to sports. Creator sports, which is actually even something I've been hearing a lot about. And, you know.
Which is terrifying, because if you're yeah. I'm sure you're hearing about it because of Hudson, but or maybe not. Maybe another person that I could also think of. But yeah, I think to me, what's interesting about this, so Perfluence did this really great article. So like, if you want a really long read on this very topic, like, just click on that. But essentially, what they were saying in the article is like, look at how people are watching sports. And I think this is something that's really, really interesting. The 60% of Silvers and, you know, Gen X are watching sports on TV, but only 40% of Gen Z are. And you can kind of like extrapolate that percentage drop, like keep going, and you can see where things are going, right? Like, most of sports now is being watched on YouTube, is being watched through TikTok clips. And for example, Good Golf is a YouTube channel that is like a bunch of dudes who play golf. They're very good. It's not like they're amateur in the sense that they're not like, you know, technically pro, but they are very entertaining. It's like you're watching the sport, but you're also watching them, right? And it's just a very different way of watching golf on TV, even though it's not TV, right? And they have now created their own championship. So it's this is like, creators are creating these tournaments. And this is happening across every single sport. So golf is one example. I gave another one that was basketball. There were two in there that was soccer. And everyone is kind of creating these different leagues. And these are not pro leagues. These are creator leagues. And I've written about like other people, you know, like Mr. Beast has had some people on his show where he's pitted kind of creator athletes versus professional athletes. And these creator athletes, like, they're very good, you know? They're not amateur in this, like, you know, and sometimes they are, and that's fun too. But it's just a very different, things are changing in this space a lot. And so if you're a brand who's kind of looking, and I think, you know, there's always been, like, I've worked with a lot of brands and they're like, oh, you know, I don't really know how to deal with kind of e-gaming. And this isn't really e-gaming. These are more like, I would say this is kind of like an in-between space in my mind between like traditional sports and e-gaming, which is like pure online gaming. And this is kind of a creator gaming, is creating this kind of third space in here of different opportunities for you to kind of engage in the sports. And people are entertained. And so I think it's a space really worth watching.
Yeah, it's fascinating. All right. Excuse me. There's a ton to talk about in wellness and beauty, and I definitely recommend like digging deeper. But just in the time, I want to just dig into one. So I think talking about higher standards and Dr. Bronner and B Corp and with DEI and all the things that are happening is just, it's obviously a much larger conversation. We could spend the entire 40 minutes talking about it, but I think it's about, you know, what is kind of, what's it say and what are the possible implications?
Yeah, well, I know this is a topic that you're passionate about too, so you can kind of say some things about it, but I'll give a kind of overview. But essentially, you know, if you haven't read the newsletter, Dr. Bronner has decided to pull out of being a B Corp. And their reasoning behind pulling out of becoming a B Corp is that they say that the standards aren't high enough. And you go deeper into the posts about it, and they talk about how essentially they feel like a lot of B Corp has been allowed to be kind of bought by a lot of brands, and that it doesn't really mean anything anymore, and that the standards really aren't there, and that they don't want to necessarily, like, to them it's been kind of in a way greenwash, but not just greenwashing, like the whole thing of B Corp is that there's other, not just sustainability things, but in the way that you run your business and your employees and things. And I think, to me, what's interesting is that we're seeing DEI kind of die and become something of a bad word. And I think as that happens, I think we're going to see more and more brands, pendulum swing back towards purpose and back towards saying like, hey, like we're not being mandated to do these things, but actually this is really important to us and it's really important to our consumer and we're going to do it on our own anyway. And we never were doing it to like check the box. Like this is fundamental to who we are. And, I think even, the originators to me of this kind of mentality has always been Ben and Jerry's and Patagonia, right? Like they weren't doing these things because like anybody was like giving them like a, tax write-off or like some like kind of check the box thing. They were doing it because it's fundamental to their brand. And so I don't think every brand's going to go in that direction. And I wrote in there, like, please don't go back to traditional CSR lame programs because nobody needs those and they haven't worked for a long time and they're not going to work now just because of this change. But I do think that there are, despite what you think and what you feel right now, there are an enormous amount of consumers who do really want their dollars to go to things that they believe in. And I actually think we're going to see more and more people kind of try to figure out how to do that, like people selling their Teslas and doing all of these things.
Yeah. That was impressive. This is a huge soapbox for me. We're a B Corp, but we became a B Corp because we thought it was the right thing to do. We had no idea what it was until we fundamentally decided all of our values. And then we're like, oh, look, they match. I've been very vocal to the team at B Corp for years about, I think they just haven't been cutting it. I think they see themselves as a certification and nothing more. And I think if they're not going to be part of really creating a movement and creating community and the tools and the knowledge, what B Corp's been around now, maybe 15 years or maybe almost 18, to really create a movement behind that. And they're just kind of letting the people do that. And I think, it is like, what is it actually doing? Who is it actually for? Does the consumer even care? I think they're all fascinating questions. And as we've seen and worked with brands around organic, like that doesn't mean anything. Clean beauty doesn't mean anything. And I'm not saying these fall into the B Corp necessarily, but I think there are various certifications that we've seen in the past that started out, oh, we all believe in this. This is amazing. This is great. Let's do this. And then they kind of fall by the wayside because nobody's behind it, creating a movement or having really high standards or whatever it might be to make it something that we all want to be a part of. And that really means something, that stamp really, holds credit.
And I think it actually ties back to a newsletter I wrote a couple of weeks ago when we talked about on here, which is the Brian Johnson, like, don't these things like don't kill you or brands don't die. I don't know what can't remember what the name of the certification was that he wanted to create. But one thing that's interesting about that is he has created a brand and a movement and a position that people feel pretty strongly and has developed like quite a large following and like quite an obsessive following around his beliefs on what needs to be done and how stringent he believes things need to be. And I think that, while he's looking at doing a certification, he does have kind of this, he built it the other way around, right? Like he built the place and then he's going to put the certification on top of it so that all of his community knows what he has approved. And it's an interesting difference. And I think, it'll be interesting to see how that works out.
Totally. That's a great example. I mean, again, it ties back to cultural relevance and what's the currency you're creating. All right. Travel. Klook.
Quite the name.
I know. I love it, actually.
So yeah, Klook is an Asian travel brand, and if you go on the app and you like go on the website, you're not gonna be like, oh my goodness, like this is so cool. It doesn't feel all that different, but to me, how it's growing is very different, and I think again, it's just an interesting. They have some interesting insights, right? So they have essentially built or are building, it seems like they haven't, some of the money is basically going to be used to build out this program even more, is that they are essentially creating a shop, like a version of Shop My essentially for travel influencers to kind of get rewards or sponsorship, or like earn points to go on to a hotel, or earn a stay, or earn this, whatever. Like they can kind of like see what sponsorships are available and then kind of go in there, and I'm sure it's tailored to like this person. It's probably very unfair, but everybody sees what they see, like that type of thing. I think it's just interesting that they're creating that program in for themselves. So essentially they're saying to brands like, hey, if you come to us, like we're over here incentivizing influencers to come and shop here and to shop your brands, So like they're making brands want to post there because it's an aggregation site, right? Like a booking.com type of thing. So there's like, it makes sense from a business perspective that brands are like, yeah, I want to come, I'm going to spend my advertising dollars, I'm going to do this thing because you're creating all of this buzz for me. And what I think is doubly interesting is that we all know, and I don't think that there's really enough people talking about this, but like people's travel habits have changed drastically. Most people are not like me doing like, I sit at home for like the 6 months or 3 weeks or whatever it is before I go away, and I'm like making my Google map, and I'm figuring out my route per day. Like I am a little bit obsessive, but I also build out these travel programs, so it's just different. It's a really different mentality to think that way. You can't like just do it on the fly. Most people are now landing somewhere, like they land in Japan, and they're like asking TikTok like what the best ice cream shop is in that moment. TikTok is telling them like the 10 different ice cream posts, and then they're going to the ice cream shop. And they are doing that for all things. So Klook offers experiences, not just like hotel stays and flights and things. So they're offering tour guides, and you want to like learn how to paint gold statues, like you can book this here. And people are finding those things in the moment. And so most of what Klook is showing in its numbers is that most of its bookings are coming in 24 72 hours prior to the action being taken. And I think that is a really interesting insight for travel and just for restaurants and hospitality and all of it in general. I think everyone kind of knows it, but it is big. And I think it's really a big shift. Like no one is sitting there with their, book anymore, like highlighting.
Right. Fair enough. And I think people are, few and far between like you that are really doing that. And the other people are me that want to benefit from that and are lucky enough to have friends that do that and curate the travel. Because I'd end up doing the exact same thing. And I think you look at Airbnb experiences, and that's why, they're so like successful and interesting. And I think this is a great insight because like, wow, booking.com, like that has some opportunity to be revamped.
Yeah, I actually don't know how successful Airbnb's experiences are, partly because they aren't necessarily tapping into like where people are finding these experiences on TikTok, and they aren't necessarily allowing you to book them last minute, which is what people are doing. And so I think that part of it is that there's this immediacy and this lack of intention prior. Like they've just been watching TikToks for 6 months, but then they're still going to go and find the TikTok on the moment. Like they're not necessarily doing it before. And I think it's just a very different way to think about, like, spa experiences and things like that. Like if people, I know so many of my friends who are like, they don't book their spa experiences before they go. I mean, it's madness. And they show up and they're like, oh, like, what should I do in this town? And, I just think it's very interesting for the hospitality industry to kind of like wrap their heads around. And I do think there's some big players like, Trip.com, Expedia, Booking, and all of these places that aren't really keeping up. And so they'll probably just get disrupted.
But it's a great opportunity. Like, I think that's a huge insight. And somebody like me, I should be getting 24/7 on Instagram advertised to of all of these experiences, because I'd be like, yes, 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 yes. Because I'm either traveling with you on a curated experience, or I'm going on some type of yoga retreat or whatever, which again is a curated experience. So opportunity for sure. All right. Fun for the week. I think these are all hysterical. Minutes. All right. But I've kind of narrowed it down because I think there are some on here, and I think it's a theme that are visually arresting, that have like a pretty unique take, and that are just fun.
Yeah. I mean, I've got soapboxes on half of that section, so we should maybe skip. But Mercedes, like that content, did you click on that one?
Yeah, I'm going to click on it. The sound may come up, so sorry in advance. Oh, no, it didn't. Okay, great.
I love this content. I think it feels really cinematic. I was shocked. Somebody was kissing in my feed. I was like, oh my God. And then it felt like suddenly very Wes Anderson moment. Like I was like, and then the graphic quality of this graphic moment. And they always say, don't use graphics on. This is proof that you should use graphics. And I just think it's really well done. I mean, if you go in the section, like obviously there's some real bigots in here, but
Jesus, I just read that.
Don't spend too much time in the there's a lot of positivity also in there, but sadly there's also this very not kind group of people in there too. But
that was one of the things that stood out to me about this, was like, and it's not like, hey, look, we're being diverse. It's like, oh, look at this. Oh, and then by the way.
Yeah, and then somebody very rightly and astutely said, because I spent too long in this comment section, they were like, you're just jealous. And I love it. True.
It's so good.
But
so
like,
good.
if you watch, like, so there's a series of these. They go into more posts. Like, there's more content as part of this campaign. It just feels really like, I mean, it's obviously Mercedes like sports, so it's not like, they're mainstream cars, but I just really enjoy the perspective of it. It feels really cinematic, and I think it feels relevant. And then that could segue us into the cinematic qualities of Solomon Gohar sisters, which is excellent. And I'm very much enjoying their content. And this is like in and of itself, like an entire movie.
It's like, so good.
It's entertaining, and then the photography quality of this campaign as you continue to watch it roll out is fantastic. The sisters are so sophisticated and yet fun and interesting, and they always are kind of quirky and weird, and I love that about them, and that's what everybody loves about the brand. And it kind of comes in this, again, has it's a movie, and I really like it. And
the sound that you're not hearing on this, is important.
That the shoe is called a whisper, and so like then they have this, it's just clever. I loved it. Big claps on this one.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Yeah, those are good. Yeah. And the last one I would put in that category, which isn't content, but if I had a home gym.
Yeah, well, you shared this with me.
I mean, so good.
Yeah. So Kenko is a brand that is making very, very elevated workout gear. Like, think like wooden handle kettlebells, but like, it's not like granola wooden, like it's like really,
really refined,
beautifully, really refined. Actually looks like it might work, which is also a problem with some of these kinds of things typically. And it's really cool. And I think it really speaks to the fact that a lot of people are building home gyms and workouts, especially strength training. And strength training equipment is just like downright ugly. and
Totally.
no one really wants it around. And if you don't have the fortune of having your own gym, then this looks a lot nicer in the corner of your room.
Yeah. It makes me want to have my own home gym. So another episode.
Yeah. That's I'm here on this podcast because I'd like to have my own home gym. So
amazing. All right.
This is fun.
That's all we got.
Ciao.
Till next time. See you next week.